That way.
That's the left way, because the other way aggravates them.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Do you need her to take a level?
No.
You're okay.
There's actually just one piece of hair sticking out there. Sorry, if you don't mind me.
Once upon a time, there were 3 bears. And, okay, John?
Something?
Okay, are you...
Sound of music.
Sound of Music for the umpteenth time.
You rolling? Yep. Okay. If you could reach back to your on Broadway 3 successes in a row, and this new Rodgers and Hammerstein musical opens, I'm curious if you saw it then.
Yes, I did. I think I must have seen it at a special actors benefit, because I think I was probably working also on Broadway, and I went to see Mary Martin in The Sound of Music, and I never dreamed that I would be asked, to play the film, which was a great thrill.
Reaction to the show?
I liked it very much. I think when it came time to do the film, one of the sort of primary concerns of all of us was, oh gosh, if we're not careful, adding the beautiful scenery of Austria and things like that, it could become unbelievably saccharine. So we did our best to kind of take some of the sugar out of it and make it just a little bit more astringent. And I think you have to thank Chris Plummer for that too. He really made an enormous contribution in sort of being the marvelous sort of strong person that held us all together.
Oh yeah. Oh, didn't we?
Okay.
That's right. We were going to do that.
So I'm not seeing
All right. Well, I'll start again because I have another thing to say about that, actually.
Well, I just came back from New York doing Chris, and he was very funny about talking that.
Was he?
Talking about that, he said, it could have been unbearable.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Okay. So the question was, and I'll repeat it.
You want to start over?
Yeah, I might as well, and I'll try and
Okay,
put it.
We'll talk about you're on Broadway and the show opens.
Yeah. I think I was performing on Broadway in My Fair Lady when The Sound of Music opened. It may have been Camelot, but I think it was Fair Lady. And I went to see the actors' benefit performance of Sound of Music, and I liked it a lot. I obviously never dreamed that I would be asked to play the role of Maria. I think I really thought that probably Mary would do it when the time came for the film. And also, shortly thereafter, Carol Burnett and I did a performance at Carnegie Hall where we did an absolutely outrageous spoof on The Sound of Music and the Pratt family singers, as we called ourselves, and little knowing that I would actually be doing the film later.
For the benefit of hearing it directly from you, could you just go over the beginnings of your film career and that you did back-to-back projects and lead it up to your first meeting with Bob Wise and hearing about the desire to have you play Maria?
First meeting with Bob. Can you remember that, Mike?
I think he came over, he brought you over to the studio and you went and you asked him, how are we going to get the schmaltz out of this piece?
Did I?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good time to mention that then. Okay.
And he
Do you
said, oh, we're going to get along just fine.
I guess Sound of Music was only the third film that I had ever made, and up to that point I was obviously only really known for the things that I'd done on Broadway, and that's actually wondrous for me, but I don't guess the rest of America really knew who Julie Andrews was at that time. So I had done early years in vaudeville in England, had the good fortune to come to Broadway to do The Boyfriend and My Fair Lady and Camelot, and then Walt Disney asked me if I would do Mary Poppins, and right after that I did the Americanization of Emily, and then came the offer to do The Sound of Music. The interesting thing is that I had made all 3 films and not one of them had been released, and so I had the great delight of just feeling like I was just playing at making movies, and I had none of the responsibility. I didn't really know what people were going to say or if they were going to be success. I just had a lovely time making 3 films. But it was strange that all 3 were in the can and they hadn't been released. And I think it came out that it was Poppins, and then I guess in that order, Poppins and Emily, and then The Sound of Music. gosh, it's such a long time ago to remember when I first met Bob, but I think he asked me over to the studio, to 20th Century Fox, to have a meeting. And he spoke about The Sound of Music. Obviously, I was absolutely thrilled. And my only concern was whether it would be very saccharine, because when you add the beautiful scenery of Austria and you've got 7 children and everything else that's kind of gooey and icky, and nuns as well, it could get very saccharine. So my one worry was that my one hope was that we would get to take some of the sugar out of it and make it just a bit more astringent. And happily, Bob had exactly the same feelings I did, so it was marvelous.
I guess there could be a possibility to boil this down and to look at it as, oh, it's a singing nanny again. Did that cross your mind?
I think the fact that I had done a nanny role as Mary Poppins crossed my mind, and I'm very glad that I had done the Americanization of Emily sort of in between the 2 films, because I hoped it would show that I didn't always just play sort of nanny roles. And as it was a hard image to get away from, because Sound of Music was so successful, and Poppins too, I guess. But I'm glad I had Emily in there. But listen, I wouldn't have turned down the role for anything, so I was going to do it come what may if they asked me.
Now, at some point, hopefully to your delight, a script for the movie came your way, written by Ernie Lehman, who made a lot of changes from the play.
Right. I only know that certain songs had been added and a couple of songs had been deleted from the play, but I don't remember too many actual scenes that were different. I mean, obviously for a film it's fleshed out, but to my feeling it stayed pretty much the same as the play, basically. The story was basically the same. And I loved the screenplay. I thought it was fine.
Now, although they started the filming in Hollywood, of course the bulk of it was in Salzburg. Could you give me your impression of the city before we talk about the production?
Right. Don't stop rolling camera. Mike, the very first stuff we shot was in the courtyard of the nunnery convent, wasn't it? On stage.
The very first thing was my favorite things.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
And
Okay.
the graveyard at the
And
end.
then the graveyard, and then
And
we
then
didn't
Maria.
do then what?
Maria and all the nuns singing.
Right, and all of that, and then we pretty quickly went to Austria. And has that all been talked about? I'm sure it has.
Not really, not in that kind of...
Okay. And
yeah, I'd like to...
and then we came back and did the rest of the musical numbers. That's the way it went. Right. Okay.
Excuse me, your hand's sort of wiggling around just in the corner of the screen.
Okay, I'll keep it out of the way. So how do I get into this? We began shooting.
Well, just tell me, start with Salzburg and tell me what you think of it.
Okay.
I'd like to get some feeling of the city.
Yes. The thrill of seeing Salzburg in the spring is extraordinary. If anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend that they do, because it was so beautiful. There were tulips everywhere and daffodils everywhere, and every kind of blossom was out, and the city just sat there and was. I'd never been to Salzburg before in my life. Everybody else managed to get to do a lot of sightseeing, but I was so busy and I was in so much of the film that there wasn't that much time for me. And if there was time, I had my very tiny little daughter with me, and I was sort of either home being a real nanny or just being so weary that I decided I'd rest. But I saw as much as I could, and of course filming on location as we did all around Salzburg and into Bavaria, I had some marvelous opportunities to see the mountains and the scenery and beautiful lakes, and it was a very happy time.
You mentioned the rain problems.
Yeah, I will. It was a very happy time. The only thing was that somebody somewhere forgot to mention that Salzburg has the world's, I think, 7th highest annual rainfall. And so, of course, along with all this gorgeous. We were very lucky. We got a lot of sunshine to start with, but towards the end of our stay there, it began to rain, and it rained and rained and rained, and it made us late, and we used up all our cover sets, and eventually I do remember sitting on mountaintops covered with tarpaulins and covered by a tarpaulin, and we would do anything to sort of keep ourselves amused. We would sing songs, we would play cards, we would tell awful jokes, we would sleep, rest, eat a lot, much too much, and but we would always keep waiting for that one break in the clouds when a tiny piece of sunshine might come through, and then it was like being asked to get ready for a party and then being told to sit very still and not get mucky or dirty, and then 8 hours later you might get asked to rush out and perform. And of course it was icy cold at times, especially high on the mountains. So I would be freezing as I was sort of trying to look jolly and full of delight.
I guess there was a lot of pressure at the end of the schedule to do the last scene which was shot, which was the first scene in the movie.
The first scene in the movie
which
being...
was doing your opening, the opening song. It's the last thing shot on location. The
last thing shot on location in my memory was, and I'm just talking now, was going over the mountains to Italy. Wasn't that the last thing we shot?
No, it was the opening shot.
Oh, okay, I can tell you a lot about that one. Okay.
And so if you could tell us about getting up to that location in the mud and the ox cart and
okay.
getting the twirl and the helicopter.
Okay, okay. The last shot of all that was photographed was the very opening shot of the movie, that beautiful series of shots of Austria that lead eventually to my coming towards the camera across the field and making the big turn and starting to sing The Sound of Music. And, well, it was quite hilarious because the main part of that shot was shot by a helicopter, from a helicopter. Camera was kind of hanging out over the side of the helicopter, which meant that I would be told to start striding across the field. All of this done with bullhorns because, of course, nobody could be in sight on that vast field except me. And so it was, okay, Julie, the helicopter's coming in over the trees. You can start walking now. And so I would stride and stride across the field. And the helicopter would kind of come in sideways in a sort of crab-like way towards me. And at a particular moment, when I judged it had come close enough, I did a big turn and began to sing. And what nobody knew was that we did this any number of times so that the cameraman was absolutely sure that he'd gotten the shot that was necessary. But once that particular moment had been captured, the helicopter, of course, would go around me and go back to the end of the field, and I would race back to the other end of the field, and we'd start all over again. Well, the downdraft from the jets of the helicopter, it was very close by the time it got to me, and it was so strong that it would just level me onto the field. So I don't know how many takes we took, but about 8 or 9 times I was absolutely leveled into the mud. And I kept thinking, I will stand up next time. I will definitely not be flattened by this incredible sort of storm that attacked me from the jets. I fell down every time. But listen, it was something to laugh at later.
It's because it's such a heavenly moment in the film. It's like, it was hell.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing was, it was mostly, it was this crazy world of filmmaking. I mean, one knew what one was trying to do, but it was so funny behind the scenes.
Another one shot on location was a new song written for the film, I Have Confidence. Could you talk about some of the filming of that?
Yeah.
Some of the things you brought to that, like the little pratfalls and stumbling, getting the guitar caught in the bus.
Yeah. One of the songs that was shot on location was I Have Confidence, and that was not in the original Broadway show, and I think it was written especially for the film. And the lyrics were a kind of mad jumble. I guess it sort of signified Maria's sort of confusion in her head, and so nothing really made sense. And so we decided that the best way for Maria to sing this was to be quite sort of wacky and so full of nerves that she tripped a little bit and she jammed her guitar in the bus a little bit. And so it was great fun coming up with bits and pieces of shtick to do to make the song seem as silly and confused and worried as possible. And I remember one moment of that song when Maria comes to the gates to look at that big house for the very first time, and I don't think anybody knows it, but in fact it was raining in the background. Thunder was rumbling all over the place and great big drops were coming down, but it takes an awful lot of rain to show up on film, and it never showed. So.
Great. And to get back to...
Do you want to get into anything like the ox cart or the farmer that punctured the great big hole? Has anybody told about that?
Because Bob forgot about it.
Oh, no!
I said, well, okay. Yes, go ahead and go back and tell that. About getting up to that location.
A lot of crazy things happened on location. Funny in retrospect, but terrible at the time. So many of the locations were very high and inaccessible, and one would park the bus and the camera equipment and all of those kind of things at the bottom of the mountain and then have to carry it up by hand, and we'd all have to plod a couple of miles maybe, or a mile anyway, to get to this sort of remote spot where we were shooting. So one would bundle oneself up, and eventually, on a very cold day, I remember being in full makeup and full sort of peasant skirt with a big fur coat around my shoulders, and they gave me a ride with all the camera equipment in the back of an ox cart pulled by these two big oxen that were just sinking knee-deep into mud just to get us up the hill. And there was a very angry farmer, I remember, who got angry that all this Hollywood crew were upsetting his cows and I think spoiling their milk or something. So we had a pretty little pond built, a little stream built for me to throw pebbles in the middle of the opening song. And it was there one day, and we came the next day to continue that moment, and it was completely dry, and the farmer had come out with a pitchfork and just pierced all the plastic that was lining our beautiful little stream, and all the water had run away, and we had to start all over again with that. And I believe that the company asked the farmer not to mow his field, to keep the corn or the hay, whatever it was, as high as possible, and because we had to shoot it one day and then come back a couple of weeks later and shoot it again. And of course he was paid for this, paid for the corn that he would lose. And so he said, absolutely, I won't touch it. And when we came back 2 weeks later, it had been absolutely leveled. So I think he'd gotten his money and gotten his hay crop in as well. I guess we had to find another field for that.
You wonder how Maria, if she had really gone up to the mountain to sing the song, would have gotten there.
Well,
if there was any ox cart in the
well, I guess Maria herself, the real Maria, probably had a very good pair of legs that was used to mountain climbing, but this Maria huffed and puffed her way up the hill and needed a good hot cup of coffee at the end of it. I remember one day we were sitting around in rain and we were so cold, and we discovered that the farmer of this particular area made his own I'll stop and start again. What is that? Schnapps, I guess. Yeah. We were sitting around and we were absolutely freezing cold and very wet, and we discovered that the farmer of the area where we were shooting made his own schnapps, and it was passed around, and boy, were we in a good mood. About 10 minutes later, there was a good shot for all of us, and it was the most delicious stuff, and it couldn't have come at a better moment.
As long as you're talking about waiting around for the rain, tell me about the vocal zones.
Oh, I've said that we would do anything to amuse ourselves while we were waiting for the clouds to part and the sun to come through. And Mark Bro and Dee Dee Woods and Saul Chaplin and myself, and I think a couple of other people whom I can't remember at this moment, we would we would harmonize and sing any song that we could think of very loudly just to keep ourselves warm. And we decided that we would call ourselves the vocal zones, which happen to be a little pastil that I use sometimes when I'm about to sing. It sort of makes my throat feel good, and they're called vocal zones. So we were a hot group called the Vocal Zones.
Where am I? Okay. Cool.
Is it all right, John? Yeah.
This is a break.
Okay.
Okay, Do Re Mi was the other big number shot on location, and again, very different from the stage show. Several locations started on another mountaintop.
Right. Do Re Mi was shot all over Salzburg, and that was the best fun to shoot. It was lots and lots of little scenes, a complete montage of visual shots of Salzburg and around it. And it was heavenly, because all one had to do was a little bit here and a little bit there, and yet suddenly when the whole song came together, I had no idea it was going to be as powerful as it was, and I think it came together wonderfully. It was a joy to shoot, and the kids were fun, and there was just a lot of good times on that movie. The kids were adorable. I mean, well, I could go on and on about them.
Let's keep on that track,
Okay.
because we'll talk about my favorite things now, and you should know that Bob gives you full credit for getting these kids warmed up. Because my favorite things was like the second or third day.
That's right. That's right.
And he gives you full credit. with
Oh, how
singing
sweet.
them and tickling them and
And yeah, I did try, because they were as nervous as I was, and he gave me something to do. We really all got to know each other on the very first number that we shot on the film, which was My Favorite Things. And I was nervous, and the children certainly were nervous, and that's supposed to be such a joyous, easygoing song. And when it came time for individual close-ups or moments when we were all tumbling on the bed, I felt stiff, and I know perhaps the kids did a little bit too. So I did my best to jolly them along. I would pull silly faces off camera to make them smile. I would tickle them. I would try to sort of make us feel like a jolly, happy group, and it worked. And I think it cemented a friendship that has gone on for the last 30 years. We adore each other. The only shock to me is that all these tiny children who stay fixed in my memory have all grown into these lovely adult human beings, and I sometimes don't recognize them.
Your 8 minutes up yet, Jose? Okay. Okay. Let's now talk about doing Lonely Goat Herd, the puppet show.
Oh, yeah.
How did you do that? What was that like? Singing and yodeling.
Okay. Let me just give it some thought. The Lonely Goat Herd was fun to do, because of course we had to manipulate the puppets, which we had to be taught obviously how to do, and it was a little bit like patting your head and rubbing your tummy and trying to do it all while looking very graceful. It was hard to sing and yodel and maneuver the puppets so that they looked real. It was quite a strenuous thing to shoot. I found it kind of tiring, because we were all jammed in a very, very small area, and there was just a lot to work out technically more than anything else. And I remember at the end of it, I thought, Maria really would be exhausted at the end of this. I mean, she would have had to have taught the children the song, and she would have had to do all the things that we were trying to get on film. And so I thought, well, I'm going to show her exhaustion. And Bob Wise, I think, thought that I'd gone a bit too far, because I came around the corner of the little mock theater practically on my knees, but I think he kept that take in. He eventually liked it a lot. And I was exhausted, and I figured she would be too. And I also thought that 7 children would be exhausting for Maria. When Mother Abbess says, you're going to work for 7 children, I really think that Maria would have said, 7 children? I mean, that's not an easy thing to comprehend, and it was daunting, to say the least.
Also, little things like when Kurt asks Maria to teach him the dance, she's like, oh, and when they say, what kind of things do you think of, and she's like, oh, it's this exasperation that you brought to it that show that this is quite a thing to handle.
Yeah, I thought that it might help once in a while to look just a mite exasperated or a little bit exhausted or whatever with 7 kids, and it wasn't a bad thing. One of the things I remember that was hilarious again was shooting in Salzburg, and that was the boat sequence, and coming home to the villa. Thank you. I didn't want to say Schloss or whatever. Coming home to the villa, we were all rowing in a boat, and Christopher Plummer is waiting on the sidewalk, very angry at us for having been gallivanting around the countryside in the bedroom curtains. And I think the first thing was that I was asked if I would please look after Kim, the baby, the smallest of the children, because she couldn't swim. So when I fell out of the boat, the minute I surfaced, would I please grab the little girl? And we obviously did several takes, and I managed, but the final take, the boat rocked so violently that I went over the wrong side of the boat, and Kim went over the other side of the boat, and there was this awful moment when I thought, my God, where am I and where is she? And I managed to find this gasping little girl who was just about done in, I think, or done for. And we took her to the bank, and she was fine, thank God. Places that we were going to have to shoot.
Okay. Okay, one more song.
Oh, yeah.
And that is,
God.
Something Good, another new one written for the movie, replacing the one that had been in the play.
Is it all right to talk about the terrible arcs that kept making
Yes,
us...
please.
Okay.
And the kiss that took several takes.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, I'm no fool. Yes.
Christopher was very, he was commenting about how you have to sing this intimate song and you're right there, and so it was just impossible.
Impossible, yeah. One of the songs that was done actually in Hollywood on the soundstage, apart from my favorite things, was I Must Have Done Something Good. Is that what it's called, by the way?
Something Good.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Was Something Good. And it was filmed in this beautiful rotunda that was supposedly in the garden of the villa. And that came quite close to the end of the film, and it was a very long shoot. How long were we shooting for in all? 16 weeks? 20 weeks, maybe. Yeah. It was a very long shoot altogether. I mean, I think in all it was just under 5 months. We took a small break when we came back from Salzburg and started shooting again, and it took us a while to get going again. But by the end of almost 5 months, I was exhausted and feeling a bit wobbly and slightly vulnerable. And we got inside this beautiful set. And in order to get the effect of moonlight, our director of photography had tipped a lot of really huge arcs, the great big spotlights, straight downwards. And in those days, those spotlights were lit by carbons that rubbed together. I don't think they have them these days, but in those days they did. And because they were tipped at such a steep angle, the carbons occasionally would make this terrible squeaking noise or groaning noise, and it eventually sounded as if someone was making a comment on the scene, because we would be doing the most lovely sort of loving things and saying, oh, I love you, and I love you too, and you'd hear what sounded like a really rotten raspberry from the background. And since Chris and I were in tremendous close-up and slightly out of focus with each other anyway, it was impossible to look into each other's eyes and hear this comment in the background and keep a straight face, because I was tired, I got the giggles. And I got the giggles so badly, and Chris also, I have to say, was no help. And we simply collapsed. I had tears running down my face, and it was such an important scene, and I felt such a fool. There was nothing I could do about it. So finally, Bob said, I think I'd better wrap the company for a couple of hours. Why don't you all go away, walk around the lot of 20th Century Fox and get... he wasn't angry. I thought he would be furious with me, but he was very, very patient and very understanding. And so I went off, and I was in a highly nervous state because I know myself very well, and when I get the giggles, I'm afraid I have been known to wrap a set, and that's the end of it for the day. So we went and we had a long 2-hour lunch and came back, and one of those arcs made the same stupid noise, and I was just gone. And finally, Bob got the idea, I think, that it would be wonderful to shoot the scene partially in silhouette, so that as we moved into a new part of the scene, he would shoot it so that you actually couldn't see our faces. And I'm sure that as much as it was a creatively wonderful idea, it was an on-the-spur creative idea, because he didn't know what else to do but hide our giggles and our smiles. By that time, we had calmed down a little. I think I took a Valium even, but it didn't help much.
Do you want me to cut it?
One Valium, for God's sake. I did. You can do whatever you like. I mean, if you feel that it should, then do.
Okay. As long as you don't, then
I don't think it makes me real, and it was real, yeah.
All right. Some other locations in Salzburg. The Cathedral of Montsey, you might mention that Dorothy Jenkins' wedding dress.
Oh, yeah.
Very cold cathedral.
Yes, it was, and that was sitting around for hours. I have a photograph in my office today of Bob Wise and me standing in the cathedral in Montsey? Montsey, thank you. I have a photograph today of Bob Wise and me standing in the beautiful cathedral at Montsey, the lake. There was a beautiful cathedral built right close to it where the wedding was shot. And nobody warned us how cold it was going to be. It was freezing. And of course the cathedral wasn't heated. And so I was in this beautifully fragile dress designed for me by Dorothy Jenkins, and it was the most glorious creation to wear. But it was paper thin, and I was cold. There was an awful lot of sitting around just to light that cathedral. You can imagine, lights outside, lights inside, lights hiding behind pillars, and the local people actually came in, and they were asked to dress up in their traditional costumes, which they did, and it gave tremendous flavor and character to the look of that scene. It was a beautiful scene eventually, and I did enjoy shooting it, but I remember, I don't know if I can say this and you can cut it, I remember that the bishop was the real bishop of the cathedral, the gentleman that married us, and he was kind of a dirty old man. Because I would be changing in the vestry or somewhere, and he kind of kept coming in. It was his office, I think, or something. And he kept coming in and having a little peek, and was terribly excited about all these Hollywood people that were there. I don't think you can use that, but it's true. Yeah.
Something I haven't done.
Oh, there you are. It is true. We all said that. He's a dirty old man. He really is. Oh, and he also was a bit plotzed. Well, anyway. I guess simply because you're a member of the church, it doesn't preclude you being a dirty old man. Well, never mind.
A little stealing from the communion supplies, maybe?
Well, he certainly seemed a little high on something, so maybe he was stealing from the supply of wine, and maybe it was in the vestry. I wish I had known.
Okay. Near as I could figure from the shooting schedules, there were about 5 overnight shoots at the Rocky Riding School to do the festival.
Oh, my Lord, yes. Glad you reminded me. Yeah, probably the coldest we were, though. I mean, it seems like it was nothing but rain and cold, but it really was. since it was sort of early to mid-spring that we were shooting in Salzburg, was the Great Riding School. And that's because it was simply built of this beautiful stone, and it just seemed to hold the damp. And gosh, we seemed to be there forever. If there was a truly tedious moment in the film, for me, it seemed like it was the riding school scenes that were shot. Of course, it's now this beautiful concert hall. It used to be a riding school, I believe, but now it's this glorious concert hall, and of course it's shown as a concert hall in the film.
You also got permission the company got permission to shoot outside and in the forecourt of the real Nürnberg Abbey. Did you have any experience there? Or?
You mean the abbey that's right on the hill?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did, didn't we?
That was Maria's real abbey.
Yeah. Yes, we did. I don't know if I have any memories of that, excepting how beautiful the cobblestones were. I don't remember that. But there was something else. Oh, the only there's one thing that I remember about Salzburg, and that is I didn't have a chance to get out that much. But one night I was able to go and hear a concert of chamber music by Mozart. And it was my day off, and I decided that I really should do this. And I remember going into this gloriously decorated room, gilt and mirrors and tiny little gilt opera chairs almost, or concert chairs where one sat very stiff-backed and listened to the music. But the music was so appropriate for the place that it suddenly became terribly romantic. One thinks of Mozart as being pristine or certainly beautiful, but this was absolutely lush, and it was simply because the music was being heard in the place where it was composed, and it was glorious. It was a night that I will not forget.
That's wonderful, sorry.
Well, it actually was very, very... I hadn't realized how sexy Baroque music can be, and it was.
When it came to shooting the exteriors of the villa, the back required two locations.
Mm-hmm.
Shots towards the house, seeing the house, was one location.
And then the back was another location, yeah.
So every scene had to be shot twice, including that very heated argument scene.
Oh, I see, depending on which angle it was. I didn't realize that. I only know that the front of the house was one place and the back was another. But in fact, are you sure about that? Is that true, Mike?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well, the house they chose for the building was Frunberg.
Uh-huh.
So you needed shots of that same architecture.
But then we wanted the lake and all of that.
So then they reconstructed the porch from that house.
You're absolutely right.
So all those scenes
Yeah.
had to be shot twice, two locations a mile away, so that they could be intercut. And it works wonderfully, but I was just wondering if there was any...
No, funnily enough, it skipped my memory, but now that you mention it, I do remember it being done. I don't think I have any comment to make,
Okay.
except the great argument scene that Maria has with Von Trapp about the children right after she's fallen into the lake and stands there dripping wet was kind of difficult in many ways. First of all, the scene, the lake was one location, the back of the house was another, and since I was facing the house and Christopher was facing the lake, it meant that we had to do half the scene in one location and half in the other, and of course it all looks like one place on film. The other difficulty was that I was dripping wet, and so of course I would be standing around with towels and fur coats and God knows what on to try to keep me warm. But in fact, every time we did a close-up or any kind of shot from that scene, I would have to be sprayed and made completely wet all over again. So it's amazing one didn't catch one's death of cold. I never had a cold on that film. I must have been having too good a time.
Too much schnapps.
And yes.
Okay. Is it true that you go through some effort to make Bob Wise crack up?
I did delight in making Bob laugh, yeah. Well, he's such a sweetie pie, and he's so unbelievably kind and such a joy to work for and to work with. And he taught me an enormous amount. He taught me to be still. It's very hard for me to be still, as you've probably noticed, but on close-ups and things like that, I had a tendency to blink too much or to move. Actually, I don't know if anybody's ever spotted this, but you can't look somebody in the eyes. You can only look in one eye, because otherwise your gaze shifts. So eventually one obviously tries to sort of look somewhere in the middle. But I had this habit of switching my eyes back and forth a great deal, and Bob mentioned it to me, and it was tremendously helpful in so many tiny, tiny details like that that made me, I think, look better, and certainly I remembered them all my life. But I did delight in teasing him a little and trying to make him crack up. I just wish we'd done a whole lot more films together. We did eventually go on to make Star together, which was tremendous fun also. But I'd like to have done about 6 more after that with Bob.
A couple more instances for Salzburg to run by your memory. One was a day that you hired a bus for a bunch of you to go to, I think it was Munich, to the ballet.
To the ballet, yeah, to see my chum. I wonder what they were, I think they were doing something like Sleeping Beauty or something. Towards the end of the stay in Salzburg, a very close friend of mine, actually my daughter's godmother, a wonderful ballerina called Svetlana Beryozova, was appearing with the Royal Ballet in Munich. And Munich is so close to Salzburg, and I was determined somehow that I was going to get to go and see her perform. And so it occurred to me it would be fun for all of us to go and see her. And so I hired a coach, and we set off one day and had a kind of picnic on the coach. And by that time, by the end of Salzburg, we were such a close-knit company. And honestly, I guess about 20, 30 of us went. It was a marvelous, marvelous day. It took a while to get there, and it took a while to get back, and a lot of silly jokes on the bus, and a lot of fun. And of course the wonderful ballet and the beautiful opera house in Munich. It was quite a nice day.
I found the little note that you sent to all the people to come. It said,
Oh, did you?
Oh, yeah.
What did it say?
It said something like, keep it clean, Sally's bringing his tape recorder, or something like that.
Did I say?
And it also said, no minors allowed. I was wondering, this off the record, I was wondering if that little incident might have been the basis for getting the scene in Star where Gertie hires the bus and they all go off to Maine.
That's a very good point. I don't think it did. She probably did that anyway. And probably 100 million other people have had the same idea. I did a similar thing just recently, for what it's worth. I did a similar thing in putting it together when I was on Broadway earlier this year. And my daughter has started a theatre in Sag Harbor on the northern end of Long Island. And I arranged for the whole company to go out and have a day by the sea and to see the theatre. And we had a wonderful lunch out there. And I know that it was a conscious or unconscious, probably more conscious, effort to recreate the fun we had on that lovely day when we went to Munich.
And one more incident from Salzburg. You're shooting I Have Confidence on the Residence Plot Square, and Baroness
Yeah.
shows up. And then you can also lead into maybe later on that you had her on your show.
Yeah, okay. A lot of people have asked me if I ever met the real Maria von Trapp, the Baroness, and I did. She came to Salzburg while we were filming there, and I was kind of nervous because I'm sure she must have been very anxious about who this lady was that was portraying her and so on. I like to think that we took to each other instantly. She actually is in one of the shots in the film. I believe she walks across in the background in one of the scenes when I sing I Have Confidence. We're in this huge, big square, and I believe as an extra, she and a group of people walk behind me as I'm singing. But we became very friendly for such a short meeting, and I eventually I asked her if she would care.
Start over.
Yeah.
Is that upstairs?
It's either upstairs or downstairs or in my lady's chamber, one of the two. We became quite friendly, and I eventually did a television series, and I asked her to come and be interviewed on the series, on one of the shows. And she very sweetly came, and we renewed our acquaintance, had a good time.
Are we over a bowling alley or something?
No, we're over the garage, and I don't know what's upstairs.
It's only a 3.2. Let's keep going.
Yes.
Okay. Let's skip ahead now to the completion of the film, and you're looking at it completed for the first time. What's the reaction?
Do you know, I don't remember. I don't remember. I think that the film was so huge and such an enormous effort in terms of the whole physical, the feeling of exhaustion that one had when one had finished it, that I don't remember too much about seeing the finished product. I do remember one rather wonderful day, though. The film was out, but it had not been released, and I had just met and was dating a terribly attractive, handsome fellow called Blake Edwards, and he had two young children of 6 and 8, maybe even, no, about 6 and 8. And I asked Bob if it was possible to see a screening of the film, and he very sweetly arranged for a screening just for me and for Blake and his two children in the big screening room at 20th Century Fox. And I remember that I thought that the kids could get bored or hungry or something like that, so I brought a big picnic basket in, and it was quite amazing, just the four of us in this very, very large theater. They've never forgotten it. It was, in fact, one of the first meetings I ever had with the children, so, you know, I'm not a fool. I'm going to, you know, woo them somehow, and I did the best I could.
That's great. Where are you pulling all these stories that we haven't heard? That's great.
That's a nice story, yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, do you remember premieres in New York and in Hollywood? I know in Hollywood you went with Sally Chaplin.
Yeah. No, the premiere in New York, I remember for one thing only. I remember crowds, and I remember that, you know, it was very exciting, and I think I had a pretty dress on, and all of that was great fun. There's something kind of wonderful at having accomplished a really big film like that, and knowing that it's in the can, so to speak. And we got to the theater, and after it was over, we were all mingling in the lobby, and a lady came up to me, and I suddenly realized it was the actress Bette Davis. And she singled me out, and she came up to me, and she said something like, "Young lady, you are going to be a very big star." And I thought it was a very generous thing for her to say, and she obviously had enjoyed the movie enormously. And I never met her again. I just thought it was a very nice thing for somebody to say, considering she was such a huge star at the time.
I'd like to talk about a very hectic and demanding month. This would be, I guess, sort of a couple months, maybe March, April of '65. The picture opens. You receive your Oscar for Mary Poppins. You get your footprints in the foreground of the Chinese theater. How does one deal with all that amount of attention all at once like that?
I mentioned earlier how I had all the fun of making 3 films and not one of them ever being released. I mean, obviously they were, but while I was making the films, they hadn't been released yet. That sort of quiet tranquility very quickly disappeared once Poppins had opened and once The Sound of Music came out, because then it was probably one of the busiest times in my career. And I do remember it as being a sort of an assault on one's senses. There were an enormous amount of press interviews and lovely honors and accolades, like having my footprints and handprints at Grauman's Chinese, and many, many things came along. But it did kind of knock me sideways for a while. It was so much, so fast, and I was... who is ever prepared for something like that? And I certainly wasn't.
The other thing that nobody was prepared for was the fact that The Sound of Music was not only successful, but a huge phenomenon. And
Yeah.
this manifested itself too in interesting ways or strange ways.
I think we knew we had a lovely film. I personally didn't realize that it was going to be such an enormous success, and I don't know if anybody else was absolutely certain that it was going to be the hit that it was. It became its own animal, so to speak. It became this. It was almost sort of a legend in its own time, and so many people have asked me and have asked Bob what it was about that film that made it so special, and it's hard to put one's finger on it, but this is so trite, but it somehow seems to me to be true that things like, real things like ducks and pigs and horses and nature and beautiful scenery and gorgeous songs, somehow I don't guess it's a soul that doesn't want to relate to something as normal and real and lively and vivacious as that. It's the sort of fantasy that we all have, that life could be almost perfect. That, coupled with glorious music, probably had a great deal to do with it.
How did you deal with you having fleshed out this character that the world had just personalized to such a degree?
I don't think I dealt with it very well. I think I really said it all when it just knocked me sideways. I don't know, without getting into a great deal of personal stuff, it's probably not worth getting into it.
Can you tell me about when the next year, Oscar night, when Bob was off and doing the Sound Pebbles, and you went with Sally Chaplin, and you accepted Bob's award for him?
Oh, that's right. The following year, at the Oscar ceremonies, obviously the film was nominated, Bob was nominated, I was nominated, and Bob was away making a film called The Sand Pebbles, and I was asked to pick up his award for him if he won. And I was very happy to do so. It was an extraordinary night. I think it was... wait a minute. What else was up that year? Because it won for
Chicago and
that's right. Was our big contender, right?
Racking in awards and
Yeah.
looked like a sweep, but then Sound of Music started.
Yeah, and it finally got Best Picture and Best Director, right? Okay. Dr. Zhivago was the big contender, along with The Sound of Music that year, and Darling was another film. And early in the evening, Dr. Zhivago started pulling in quite a number of Oscars, and I guess all of us weren't sure where we would stand, but by the end of the evening, Sound of Music had won Best Picture and Best Director for Robert Wise, and many, many other Oscars as well. It was quite a nice evening.
I'd also like to know, with you being involved in music as long as you have, having come back to Rodgers and Hammerstein so recently for The King and I, what can you say about their place in
Nice question.
music history?
Oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. Let me think. I did a concert earlier this year with a huge symphony orchestra, and chose to sing. I was requested to sing Edelweiss from The Sound of Music. Now, you wouldn't think at first that it would be an important song. It was not a song that I actually sang in the film, but I was asked to sing it, and a beautiful symphonic arrangement was made of it, and I sang it. And as I sang it, I became aware of what a truly beautiful song it is. It's one of those melodies that is so simple, it just lies there. And I started to reflect on other wonderful Richard Rodgers melodies and Hammerstein lyrics, like Oh, What a Beautiful Morning, or Hello, Young Lovers from The King and I, and Younger Than Springtime, let's say, from South Pacific. There are so many wondrous songs that Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote. They're magical to sing. They give so much pleasure. They have something very real to say. Edelweiss has the most wonderful lyric that applies to any country when it ends with "Bless my homeland forever." It could be about any place. It doesn't have to just be about Austria. The sad thing is that a lot of my younger children's friends haven't been educated and don't know who Rodgers and Hammerstein are. And it breaks my heart because that sort of music should never be lost, ever. Happily, thanks to The Sound of Music, which I hope will go on and on and on as a film, it won't be. And I had a great thrill and made the recording of The King and I about a year ago. I don't guess they'll ever be really forgotten. There's too many of us around to talk about them, but it's an amazing body of work that they left behind, and I'm thrilled to have been a part of it. That's not a very kind thing to say. I don't mean to say that their stuff's forgotten. I just mean that there's so little education that goes on these days. Musicals are dying. I don't know if it's worth mentioning that, but they're changing. Yeah.
We said this when we
Said this
we
when?
said this when we did the Star and the
When I recorded The King and I recently, I was asked by a reporter, but why do The King and I? And I said, you wouldn't ask that question if this were La Bohème or Madame Butterfly. You wouldn't ask it about a Puccini opera. There are many, many interpretations. This is really, these wonderful Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals, and all the great Broadway musicals really, are the classics they're the popular classics of their day. And they stand, I think, as importantly as any opera or any great play. You can't say they shouldn't be done, they should.
For as much as the public has... Last question.
What's that?
For as much as the public took Sound of Music into their own hearts, as I said before, personalized it, I'm
Yeah.
sure there were some good relationships and benefits that came out of relationships that are still going on today. Could you talk about some of those?
I think you mean with Bob and Solly.
Sally,
Yeah.
children, Charlotte.
The friends that I made on The Sound of Music are my friends today. Bob Wise and Solly Chaplin and Mike Kaplan, our wonderful unit publicist who has done so much to keep the film alive all these years. And, of course, the children. I don't see them as often as I'd like to. I think of them a great deal, and occasionally I hear from them. We had a 10th anniversary, and we had a 25th anniversary. I hope we'll have a whole lot more. I just wish we had one every year, because it's a lot better than having to wait 10 or 15 years for an anniversary.
Good.
Good.
We're wrapped up.
Good. Perfect. I can't think of another thing.
You will see, you most likely, I think, we'll see Charmian tonight.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it is.
What about Heather and...
Heather just closed the door. Room tone. Here.
Room tone Thursday.
Room tone.